Hi, this is Ed from Wright. I hope you're doing well. Today we're going to talk about maintenance of mowers and how you can do some things that'll help you get more out of your machine, help it cost less to maintain, and on the utilization. So the longer you get your machine to last, the more value you get from it. So first off, we're going to break down all the costs related to running a mower separately, and your biggest cost is labor. And so some of the things that you can do on the labor side with your machine is, your machine is turning your time into revenue at some level. And the biggest thing you can do in terms of the machine is when you buy a mower, buy one with the biggest engine as possible. The bigger the engine, the faster you can turn your time into revenue. So that's number one. And there's some other reasons why it's good to buy a big engine. We'll get to those a little bit later on. The second thing is when you buy a mower, look at getting a mower that's very versatile. So the example here is if you have a walk-behind mower and a sit-down rider, those have specific things that they might be better at, whereas a stand-on mower can do almost anything that either of those mowers can do. So you're going to get a lot more hours on that machine. You're going to get better utilization of that asset than you would by having a variety of equipment. And again, better turns on your asset. The other thing is that about 20% of your time is spent maneuvering the machine, whether it's getting it out of the trailer or you get to the end of your cut and you turn around. And so you want to get a machine that's especially nimble. That saves time on those areas that otherwise waste time. It's difficult to speed up how fast you can actually do the cutting portion of the property, but the turns and whatnot make a difference. And what you're looking for there is a machine that has a real low center of gravity. We talk about low center of gravity when we talk about hills often, but just on a typical property, maybe there's a little bit of dew or whatever. When that center of gravity is low and all the weight's near the middle of the machine, you can stop and turn quicker and helps you save time. The other thing that's important is that you have really good sight lines, especially in the trim side of your mower. You want to really be able to see clearly what's going on. It allows you to go a little bit quicker near objects. You want a machine where your rear tires are spaced out so you have a little bit better torque control of the machine's turning. And that lets you get closer to things more accurately without bumping them, especially something like an air conditioner. The other thing is that a stand-on mower, it doesn't have anything sticking out the back of it. Like a walk-behind would have handles, or a rider might have a bumper on the back of it. So you can go in corners and turn out of those corners without making a 2 or 3 point turn, and you've got a lower likelihood of scratching a fence or knocking an air conditioner off its slab. So the second biggest cost is fuel. So the biggest thing you can do on that side of it is buy a machine that has an EFI engine. A fuel-injected engine is probably going to save somewhere between 20 and 25% on fuel. And that becomes a really big number at the end of life of the mower. Also, you get a little bit more run time on that tank of fuel. So you might get 20% more time from your fuel run time there. The other thing you can do, again, is big engines. So when you have a big engine, it's not running at max power. It's running just down from there, and that's a little bit more efficient spot for the engine most of the time. So again, that helps. The other thing is that if an engine's a little bit undersized for the work that you're doing, and the engine's bogging down, and the grass is building up in the deck, and it's starting to clump up in the deck, that ends up taking more power to cut the grass. If you have a bigger engine and it can keep the deck purged out clean, ultimately that consumes less fuel and also less wear and tear on the machine and on the engine. The other thing that a big engine does for you is it runs cooler, so it'll help it last longer and need less care. So at some point, the third biggest thing is the cost of the machine itself, right? And it's not just the purchase price, it's what you sell it for. So for example, right now, I think it's either the Honda Accord or the Toyota Prius. Those two vehicles are some of the best value cars to buy. Not because they're necessarily inexpensive, but because when you sell them, the residual is really strong. And so you want to look at the whole equation here. You want to look at buying a machine that has a history of being valuable when you're done with it. Now, the depreciation of a machine has a lot to do with the engine. It's much like a car. A car with an automatic transmission, typically people start really depreciating it when that transmission gets to 150,000 miles or something like this. Whereas if that car had a manual transmission, oftentimes the residual will be higher when you get up into higher miles. So lawnmowers, the engine's kind of like the transmission in a car. The longer the engine lasts, the better the quality of the engine, the more you'll be able to get out of that machine and the better residual. Now, some people prefer to trade in or sell their machine before the end of the engine's first life. Some people would rather at some point repower that machine and run it near to the end of its second engine. And as an example, that might be 2,500 hours or 2,000 hours or something like that. So if you sell that mower at 1,800 hours, you'll oftentimes get the best residual, and whoever buys it after you, they'll probably use it less per day than you did, and they may actually get 10 years out of those last 200 hours, especially if they're using it to cut a single site. So that's oftentimes the best trade-in point. Folks that are more handy or they want to work on their machines during the winter time themselves or do their own maintenance, sometimes they'll look at running the machine through its second engine. But oftentimes in a fleet operation that's not cost effective, it's better to trade in, because when you trade in, you get fresh parts across the whole rest of the machine, and so you're going to experience less things that have to be taken care of or messed with. So look at your residual, look at the life of the engine. Again, we talked about big engines that run cooler and the fins plug up less and all that. They're gonna last longer. So you want to take care of the engine, especially compared to anything else in the machine, because it's that thing that causes it to depreciate. And the biggest thing that causes the engine to depreciate or the engine to wear out from lack of maintenance would be either not cleaning the fins, if it's a bit of hot running engine. But the second thing would be the air cleaner. If you don't take care of the air cleaner correctly and the engine brings dust into it, that's going to shorten the life of the engine significantly. So one thing that is oftentimes misunderstood is the temptation is you take the filter out, someone takes compressed air, and they blow it off until it gets to be a whiter shade, and it looks clean. You're like, oh wow, this is going to be better for the engine. But what happens is when you blow out the filter like that, it actually breaks down, and you're blowing some of the filter media out. And so when you put it back on the machine, larger particles can get to the engine. Actually, when the filter gets a little bit dusty, a little bit dirty, that's when it's at its best efficiency in terms of filtering. And so you don't want to try to clean off the paper itself. What you want to do when you're maintaining your filter is you take it out of the machine and you take it to a garbage can and knock the dust off of it. Make sure there's no dust on the inside and put it back on the machine. There's no need to get compressed air on it. It's really not good for the filter, so don't do that. And also, as much as I'm promoting good maintenance of the air filter, changing it too often can also be a bad thing. It's okay for the media to get a little bit darker from dust. You just don't want it to plug up to the point that it's causing a restriction on the engine. The other thing you want to do is keep track of your equipment and be sure that you're rotating it evenly. You don't want to have one machine where you put 200 hours a year on it and another machine where you put 800 hours a year on it. Because now, a couple years down the road, you're going to have all kinds of different equipment that's from different years and different amounts of wear. You want as much as possible to try to get everything to wear out evenly and keep your replenishment so that you don't have some really old units and some really old new units. You want to keep that kind of even. Makes maintenance practices a lot easier because they're all going to need the same types of parts and same maintenance intervals and that kind of thing. And also, if you have a machine you're only putting 200 hours a year on it, maybe you should question why you own it and look at your primary machine. What machine can you buy there that's more versatile, that would do the job of the second machine you had and you're only putting 200 hours on it? So again, we're talking about versatility. The fourth biggest cost relevant maintenance is the unplanned repairs. So something comes up unexpected and it causes the machine to go down. On the hydro side of things, over time the hydro oil thins out. And so what you want to do is change it before it begins to break down that way. For a Wright machine, we recommend Mobil 11550 as the alternative oil. That oil initially is the right viscosity, but over time that oil does begin to thin out. And we recommend that you change it twice a year. But if you use our factory oil, it's blended specifically to the viscosity that we're looking for and has less polymer additives to achieve that. And so it's going to shear down less. And with that oil, we recommend just changing the oil once in the middle of winter, change the oil in the filter. The other thing from an unplanned maintenance standpoint is the clutch. Unplanned downtime is the clutch. At some point, the clutch will go out. But the thing is that it gives you signs before it goes out. So the clutch has a magnet in it, and when the magnet gets hot, it creates less of a magnetic force to engage the clutch. So you may find in the middle of a day when it's hot and you engage the clutch, there's just a little bit of a delay before the clutch comes in. If you see that happen, you know that you probably have maybe a week or 2 weeks on that clutch. So right away, contact your dealer, get a clutch on order, or get the machine in there and have the clutch replaced before it causes downtime. Another thing that people often ask is, should I engage the clutch with the engine at high idle, or should I idle down or half speed? And a lot of different manufacturers have different recommendations. And it is true that if you engage the clutch when the engine's at full speed, it's harder on the clutch. And it's actually even harder on the brake to disengage the clutch at full speed, because oftentimes the brake wears out before the clutch side of it. From our standpoint, we've designed all of our machines to be able to engage the clutch at full speed. And we recommend that because time is money. The time you spend throttling down the engine will actually cost you more than the wear that puts on the clutch. Now, if time is not a concern at all, or maybe you're cutting your own property or something like that, then yeah, throttling down can help. Some manufacturers recommend a number that's in the middle somewhere, so the engine doesn't surge when you engage it, and it's not so much power that maybe it would run the belt off one of the pulleys. But again, we recommend full speed. Our machines are designed for full speed, and at the end of the day, time is money in what we're doing. Tires can cause a lot of unplanned downtime, and there's a few things you can do there. One is if you use cord plugs, sometimes they leak more so than sort of a mushroom type plug. You can get a plug shooter, and those, it's a single piece rubber plug with sort of an umbrella on the back side of it, and it seals against the inside of the tire. Those are a lot more effective than the cord type plugs. Probably something you're more likely to do in the shop than in the field, but again, they're much more superior. The other thing you can do is you can buy tweels, and tweels, recognize that they're a little bit more costly, but if you look at the downtime, especially in a fleet setting, that money oftentimes comes back. We also know that tweels last a long time. Oftentimes the tweel will well outlast the engine of the machine, and will also help improve your residual. So if you want to sell it or trade it in, the tweels are going to make the machine more valuable. So you make up a little bit of your money on that side of it as well. And from an owner-operator standpoint, oftentimes the flat tires aren't as big of an issue. It's an inconvenience, but you're gonna not let it ruin your day. You're gonna fix it while you're on the fly or take care of it in some way. But in a fleet setting, the tweels can oftentimes easily make up their price. The other thing, and it's simple. I know it's probably sounds stupid to say this, but we've all done it. You have a tire that's getting low, and you put air on it, and you go about your day, and then you forget about it. And then again, it causes an issue, and then it causes an issue again. And then eventually the tire pops off the bead, and you can't get it back on, and it's a big downtime situation. That whole scenario is preventable if the first time you saw the tire was going low, flag it, and at the end of that day, be sure that you take it out of commission and you fix it preventatively so that you don't have to continue putting air into it. And the same concept applies to batteries. Oftentimes the temptation is try to nurse a battery along that's getting weak. But if a battery sits for a week and it's not going to start the engine, it's going to continue to cause you issues. So go ahead and replace that battery. If it doesn't take a charge in half an hour or an hour, and it goes dead after sitting over a weekend or something, don't fight it, start over, and ultimately you'll get more work done and less taking care of the machine. The fifth thing I'm talking about is just downtime in general. So what are some of the things you can do there? First off is buy equipment that's more idiot-proof. Sometimes more features can be a bad thing on a commercial mower. And so be sure you buy equipment that's simple, robust, it's beefy, it's very hard to damage it. The other thing you want to look at is equipment that requires very little maintenance. Equipment that you can leave in the trailer from Friday through Monday, and you don't have to pull it out through maintenance, again, contributes to your bottom line. So something as simple as a grease fitting. At the end of a mower's entire life, grease fittings can cost you more than $1,000, mostly in the time spent greasing it, also the expense of the grease. So look at things like that. Flat free front tires, pivots that don't require grease fittings, spindles that don't require grease fittings. Another downtime item is like a lot of our idler pulleys have double row bearings in them, and those pulleys oftentimes will last the length up until the life of the engine. So look for some of those low maintenance items. Another thing you can do is standardize your fleet. If you have a standard fleet, then you can swap one machine out for the other without any disruption. Your dealer is more likely to have all the parts required for that equipment, or you may have your own shop when you have all the parts that are required. And once you've done a particular job once, you know exactly how to do it again, or if you've diagnosed something and you see the same symptoms, that speeds up everything. If you have kind of a random selection of different equipment that you've bought over the years, ultimately it's going to cause you a lot more downtime, and the time spent keeping the equipment up will be more than working with specific equipment you're very familiar with. On the preventative maintenance side, a huge amount of downtime can be prevented by just being sensitive to abnormal noises or vibration. Those things are giving warnings that something's going to go wrong, and so pay attention to that. If you're running some crews, be sure that that's part of your training with your crew members, is if there's anything abnormal, anything that's happening that doesn't seem right about a piece of equipment, then stop using it then. Don't continue to use it, because in some cases, even after a couple minutes, it can lead to some type of catastrophic failure that's otherwise completely preventable. So what would the perfect world look like from a equipment and maintenance standpoint? It would be equipment that needs a hydro oil change once a year, something with no grease fittings, flat-free tires, belts that last well more than a year, idler pulleys that last the life of an engine. We would look at a machine that when you go to trade it in, it has a high value on it, because a lot of the components are still well intact and things aren't loose or getting chewed apart. Everything's still really solid. Is a machine that's going to give you a much higher residual. The other thing you can do, and it's a simple item again, if there's anything that you remove from the machine because you're putting an accessory on it or anything like that, keep those items, because when you go to trade the machine back in, if it's missing any item from that mower, especially if it's some type of guard or shield, that's going to cause that machine to be worth less. So keep those items and install them when you plan to sell your machine. And then you don't leave your equipment out in the sun in the off season. I mean, during the season, you're using it, whatnot. It's going to be in the sun. It's going to be in the rain. It's made to take that moisture, but don't let it sit over the off season like that. It causes some fading and corrosion and those different types of things. If you can keep your equipment under a shelter in the off season, that helps the presentation when you go to sell it a couple years later. The other thing that I very much would encourage you to do is when you get to the end of your season, deep clean all of your equipment. I'm a big fan of this. This is the way I take care of a lot of my stuff. The act of cleaning reinforces that you're caring for it, and it's also where you detect things that need help. And you'll be more likely to find things that are loose, things that are chafing, things that need to be adjusted, or a part that's, a belt that's got some cracks in it or something. That deep cleaning at the end of the season will help the machine sit through the winter better, and will help you know what maintenance you need to do before you put it back into use in the spring. So those are some things that I think would, that we've seen, in fact, prove that will help your trade-ins, it will help your uptime, and overall make you more effective and focused on the job and not the hassle of maintenance on equipment. Anyhow, I hope that's helpful to you, and hope you have a great season.